Welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle, educator, healer, speaker, guide, and fierce advocate for your yes. I help sensitive and successful men and women find, reclaim, and live from their full embodied yes. Through empowering you to understand your energetic hygiene, establish healthy boundaries, and heal your nervous system, you'll be able to create your yes-filled life and move through your days with more freedom, more ease, and more joy. You'll hear inspiring stories of people who found their full-bodied yes, thought leaders who pursued their own dreams and are living life on their terms, and learn new ways to find the courage, joy, ease, and freedom to more fully step into your yes-filled life. Say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. Join me on this journey to discover your yes-filled life. Whether you're looking to break free from the golden handcuffs, start a new business, find your dream job, or simply live with more intention and mindfulness, I've got you covered. Let's explore the possibilities together and make your dreams a reality. Ready? Let's do this. Let's get you to your yes-filled life. Breathe in the power of intuition. Unlock your inner wisdom with breath work. What would it be like to stop overthinking? What would your life look like if you felt clarity and ease? How would your life change if your nervous system felt regulated and you could access a state of calm even when there are storms all around you? Get ready to unlock the incredible power of your intuition and connect with your inner wisdom on a deeper level and access a deeper sense of calm. You are invited to join a transformative journey with an exclusive PDF guide and video series designed to amplify your success and well-being in this free 4-part video series, Breathwork to Strengthen and Trust Your Intuition. This valuable free resource is designed specifically for high achievers and successful people just like you who are committed to personal and professional growth, aligning with your desires and embracing your own wisdom within. You get to watch at your own pace when you get instant access to the entire series. Created for high achievers on the go, each video is less than 15 minutes. You'll also have access to a PDF guide with various breathwork patterns so that you can take breathwork with you anywhere. To get your instant access to this free 4-part series and PDF guide, go to brendawinkle.com/breathe. That's brendawinkle.com/BREATHE. Hello and welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle. Thank you for being here today. Today on the podcast, we have Aaliyah Mora-Khan. Aaliyah Mora-Khan is a modern elder. She focuses on centering leaders in their own embodied emotional intelligence and cultural heritage, and has been facilitating deep transformational change for over 2 decades. Her clients range from professional athletes and artists to corporate leaders and also everyday folks met around town. Aaliyah co-creates an environment where clients can improve relationships, increase literacy about their own energy, and navigate professional challenges. In turn, these changes can help identify and dissolve generational trauma, clean up relationships with money, and integrate mindfulness into daily activities. You are going to love this episode. Hi, Aaliyah. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Hello, Brenda. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm very excited about it.
Oh, I'm so excited too. I am fascinated by you and intrigued by your ability to tap in.
Ah.
And I can't wait for this conversation.
Oh,
So,
that sounds wonderful. I'm very excited to hear that about your view of me. I'm interested in that. So yes, that's great.
let's dive in. So, I wonder if you could tell the listeners just a little bit about you, about the work that you do in the
Mhm.
world and what lights you up.
Okay, so the tagline, as it were, is that I help center leaders in their embodied emotional intelligence and cultural heritage so that they have more presence in their worlds wherever they're moving. And the truth about that is that really my work is to make space for all of the dark, yucky, messy, emotional stuff that no one quite knows what to do with. What that means in practice is that I am spending time with my clients, learning their landscape, helping them learn their landscape as well by paying attention to it, and starting to shine lights in areas that they can't quite see yet. Right. So looking for, and in my view, we go looking for the pitfalls, we go looking for the pits of tar and sludge, because there's actually gold underneath that. And so I sit with them as we go through that sludge and dig through it and look for the gold and find the power that's there, and then find ways to come back up again and fill in the rest of that landscape so that people get to know themselves incredibly well, but they don't have to do that by themselves.
I love
There's something
this.
about being able to be with another human and be witnessed in your discovery of yourself so that things have a reality to them. So that's where I work with people. It means sitting in a lot of discomfort often, but that's okay.
It's really beautiful. And, there's a couple things that stand out to me. There is so much talk around thinking positively and positive messaging and affirmations. And, I'm here for it until we start to make that the only thing that we can talk about. And then it's like the little sand in your shoe when you're on a hike, and it starts to create friction and blisters. And if we don't deal with the things that are causing us friction, whether that's, like you say, digging in the tar or the muck, it comes out in ways we can't predict. And so I love that you're doing this work in the world because it's so important. And I know what you mean by discovering inner landscape, because that's speaking in my language. But for a listener who's like, wait, what do you mean a landscape? Could you explain what you mean?
That's a really good question. Okay, so what do I mean? Everyone has a mental idea of themselves, right? We hold stories about ourselves. We hold a narrative about ourselves. We have actual events from our history that determine who we are because we made a decision at that point. We had some behaviors that came out of that. And all of those things taken together form a map of who you are, right? A map of who you are today. And for many people, it's a map of who they think they will always be, which is not necessarily true. So when I talk about a landscape, I'm talking about really putting some attention on what is that map? What is it made up of? Examining, where did that hill over in the distance come from? Why do you constantly think that hill is in your way? What do you need to do to make that hill a molehill instead of the mountain that you've made it into?
I love that.
Right? Right. And so a landscape to me is getting a real good lay of the land of who you are as a human. And that requires a lot of curiosity. It requires a lot of sensitivity. It requires attention. It requires a span of attention beyond the 5 minutes that you play a game for example, right? It requires being able to have deep focus and deep attentiveness to what is really going on. In my culture, there's a phrase, I won't say it in the language, but I'll translate it. It's her head that's hurting, but she's complaining about her stomach. Right? That's the translation of the phrase.
Yes.
And in my experience, when I'm working with someone about the landscape of their lives, often they're pointing out there's a brick road over there, and I really don't want it to be a brick road. But what they're actually upset about is that right now they're standing in a pit of sludge,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what they see is something far ahead of them where they are, or they see something far behind them, right? But
Mm-hmm.
where they are is not what they're paying attention to. And that's actually what needs the attention right now.
I love this. It's so juicy. It's so juicy. So I had an experience recently. I was at a retreat with one of my mentors, Samantha Skelly, in
Mm-hmm.
San Diego. And we were doing this activity in dyads, like
Mm-hmm.
partners,
Yep.
where we would admit a belief that we might have had around ourselves. And then there was a script that we were supposed to use. And the only acceptable response was, there's so much love for that. So that you could really have witness for the belief that you have
Yeah.
inside. And then when someone else reflected love back to your belief, it was amazing at how it shifted. And it
Yep.
sounds to me like this is a lot about the work that you're doing in
Mm-hmm.
far as far as witnessing
Mm-hmm.
and leading and sort of shining the light for people, turning
Mm-hmm.
the proverbial mountain into a molehill.
Yeah. And it's about dissolving the things that are literally holding somebody static. Because we get boxed in many different ways, right? We don't
Mhm.
mean to. Sometimes we consciously do it. We decide that we're going to behave a certain way because that's actually how we want to be now, and then we don't realize 2 years down the line that that's actually boxed us in a certain way and isn't allowing us to move another way. So I'm really about sitting with the discomfort, sitting with the unknown, recognizing that you don't have control over that. You don't have control over what's outside of you. You have control over how you respond to that,
Mhm.
but you don't have control over what you have to get over in order to respond to that. So
Yeah.
it's a nuanced thing, right?
Mhm.
And so but you do have control over whether you decide to do something about it, whether you're willing to pay attention to it, whether you're willing to do the work to dissolve whatever it is that's keeping you static.
Mhm.
Those are the only decisions you really get to make, I think.
Mm. Mhm.
But then you get to slowly shift what's happening around you, which is always a reflection of the internal work that you've done, because nothing changes unless it comes from the inside.
Mhm.
But you have to often start the work by allowing something inside. So you have to allow your outer casing to
Mm.
dissolve.
Mhm.
So sometimes that's what my work is sitting with someone who knows where they want something to change on the inside. They have no idea how to let it in,
Right. They don't know how to open the shell.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
That makes so
And so
much sense.
sometimes, yeah. So sometimes it's just about sitting with them and saying, okay, well, let's scan over your shell. Is there a little crack here? Okay. What can you do on the inside to open that crack a little bit? Oh, look, I can see a crack, but you can't feel it yet. Okay.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
what do I, as a responsible human being sitting with you, what do I do and how gently can I tap that crack so that you can feel where it is, but you don't get overwhelmed by how fast it starts to fracture
Yes. Yes. And that's the work. That's the beauty of
completely?
the work, is
Yeah.
having the nuance and the sensitivity to be
Hmm.
able to gently tap on the crack of someone's tough outer shell
Yeah.
without having it explode. And then their nervous
Completely.
systems fire and they're like, no, no more. I can't go.
Completely. And to that effect, I mean, I am trauma informed. I have done a lot of work around, for example, I've just recently finished a course on looking at the trauma of money.
Mm.
And so quite literally how our stories around money, whether they are an individual story or a systemic story, and what that has how do I say that? So what that money story that we have connects to our trauma responses that are currently living in this body, right? So how you might, for example, get triggered by something, but only notice that you've been triggered by something when you're in the grocery store buying $300 worth of groceries and you have no idea why you're buying that amount of food, right? And so there's a trauma response there, but you don't realize there's a trauma response there necessarily. And how do you step back so that you're not spending $300 on groceries unnecessarily, or that you start to uncover that there was a trigger that went off for you? Why did that trigger go off? What landmine got stepped on in your landscape that needed some attention to remove it beforehand?
I love this. I love this. And so when you're talking about landmines in our inner landscape, I would love to hear, I'd love to hear more about that. And I also want to make sure that I allow space for you to expound on something that you said right at the beginning, which was, in my culture, this is the translation. And I'd love, because this is a podcast and not everyone will see your face, I'd love for you to, if you feel comfortable, to share a little bit about your background.
Oh goodness. Okay. Okay. So I am first generation born Indian Muslim, born in the UK, to my mother's family, who were, so my mother was born, she's Indian, but she was born in Uganda. And her family were expelled from Uganda in 1972. So she became, although she was a British subject at the time, she became a refugee in the UK, which is a very strange mental situation to be in, as well as a physical situation to be in. But her father, so my grandfather, actually left India over 100 years ago as a result of famine, which was probably the result of colonization at that point in time. I don't have great amounts of details around that. And my father was born in, actually, it's not the easiest story to tell, in that my grandfather on my father's side, in fact, my great grandfather were on my father's side and my mother's side, really, were all born under the British Raj. And so they were born in a colonized area of the world. My father was born in India, but he was 2 years old when partition happened. And not a lot of people know what partition was, but partition was where the British Raj was separated into India and Pakistan by a line being drawn through the country. And millions of people died in crossing over from one side to the other because of a decision to separate the countries based on faith, which has repercussions today. We're seeing all sorts of interesting, or not so interesting as it turns out, things happening in the world as a result of that kind of partition that happened. So my dad's family are Pakistani, and my parents met in London, and they had me, and I was the first girl born to the family in England. Not that I was the first girl born to the family, but I was the first one that was born in England. And so I grew up with sort of two different styles of Islam in my family, because my dad is a Sunni Muslim, was a Sunni Muslim, my mum's a Shia Muslim. I grew up at a time in England where schools had Christian assembly every morning. So I grew up singing hymns. I was the first one that had to balance this notion of being a good Indian girl, being a good Muslim girl, being a brown girl in a white majority area, and so on. So there's many different layers to my childhood that then reverberated out through my sort of growing up as an adult. And then when I finally moved here to the States around 6-ish years ago now, um, I really started to uncover the layers of culture that formed my landscape. And there, yeah, there's been a lot of pitfalls and tar sludges and so on in that journey. Particularly at this, the last 6 years have been a very, as the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. The proverb says the proverb of may you live in interesting times is sometimes not the best thing to be doing. But it does mean that you well, so here's what I would say. It has not been an easy 6 years living in this country, being a brown woman of color, but who sounds completely like a British white person. And so, yeah, I don't even know how else to answer that question, other than to say it's given me a lot of food for thought and a lot of things to move through.
Thank you so much for sharing so openly.
Mm.
I think I had one mentor in my master's degree program that said place matters.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I thought, okay, say more about that. And she said, I need you to get curious and do an inquiry and really lean into what that means for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got more confused, I think, at the beginning, because she was from Montana. We were living in Boise, Idaho. And I was thinking, are you talking about the place? And then I realized that yes, of course, place matters, but also the things that we bring with us from the places that we have lived.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in northwestern Nebraska. I am very, very good at the Midwestern goodbye, which is a goodbye in 7 steps when you never actually know if I'm leaving.
That sounds like the very London that many Britishers do too. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's good to know. But I think I have such appreciation for hearing people's stories, because it just it makes me love people so much when I realize we're all such a beautiful combination of the places that we've lived and the people that we've been encountering in our lives. And so I'm just so grateful for you sharing this. Thank you.
You're welcome. I tend to think of myself as a world citizen rather than of one specific place, simply because and this is a story that I tell myself, right, that helped me navigate my life of displacement, actually. And the trauma of displacement is very real for many people. There's a lot of reasons why different peoples from around the world are displaced from wherever they've come from originally. And when you come to the United States, you see that really deeply, because there have been so many waves over the last 246 years of people coming from different places in order to make a new home in a place that displaced the people that were originally here, right? So there's just a very big knot of trauma around displacement. And so I think thinking about what is place in the context of displacement is very interesting generally, because I think part of what today's world is about is finding our place and doing so without othering other people. Right? Finding our place and recognizing that we are actually all a family of humans that live on one planet, that is one home that we have in the universe, in the galaxy, and so on, that there is not actually anywhere else for all of us to go. We are a closed system. Ergo, one of the things we need to be able to do is learn how to clean up our backyards and actually clean them up, not just throw them into somebody else's backyard.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's so good. And so that might be a great opportunity for us to bring the conversation back around to finding
Mm.
the inner landscape that
Yeah.
people have. And I think that one of the things that comes up for people is a sense of shame
Mm-hmm.
around their inner landscape, feeling
Mm-hmm.
shame that wherever they may identify as having been born is
Mm-hmm.
for some reason shame filled. I know that as I've
Mm-hmm.
moved around the United States, that
Mm-hmm.
it really, I was surprised at how much inner work I needed to do to be
Mm.
able to say I'm from Nebraska, even though I
Yeah.
live in Portland, Oregon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think digging into the inner landscape is so beautiful and so rich. And I love that you help people do that, and especially from a leadership lens.
Mm-hmm. Well, so in my view, every human is a leader.
Mhm. Mhm.
Every human has the capacity to be a leader. The question is, do they see themselves as a leader? And if they do, great. How do they continue to expand in that realm? And if they don't, well, then how can they start to?
Mhm. I think those are such
Because,
important questions.
yeah, completely.
And
Yeah.
from my point of view, I think that there's also an opportunity to be self leaders, to
Yep.
lead ourselves. And we don't
Absolutely.
talk about that very much, but the truth is we do need to lead ourselves, especially if we want to grow and develop and expand.
Absolutely. I love that you bring that point out, because the truth about leadership is that you can only lead when you know what leadership is in yourself,
Mhm.
right? You can only do something when you have a sense of what it actually is,
Mhm. Yes.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you're perfectly right that leadership comes from within. All humans are capable of being leaders. Leadership has to be something you do for yourself first. Then you learn how to apply it to anyone else around you. But it has to come from within first.
Mhm.
I was talking to someone yesterday about adulting. It's a great term. And it's a term that has, this idea that adulting is there because we're children the rest of the time, or that adulting means we're doing hard things. To me, adulting just means we're doing responsible things.
Mhm.
We're becoming aware of what it is to be responsible. And I see it, I actually see it in the context of you're being responsible for yourself as an individual, and understanding what your responsibility as an individual is to the collective that you
Mhm.
live within,
Mhm.
that you are part of. And the collective could be the community you're part of, a community you want to become part of, the town that you live in, the library that you've joined, like any online community that you're part of. It's where you find yourself. How do you, as an individual, make a contribution to people around you? And that's based on connection, right? That's based on connection to yourself and really understanding who you are, and a willingness to discover more about who you are, and then the ability to start turning that curiosity outward, from inwards to outwards, to then start paying attention to what's happening around you.
Mhm.
It's
I love that.
magic.
It is magic. It is
Yeah.
magic. And, to your point, connection
Mm-hmm.
is also where I find tremendous healing. I found
Yeah.
personal healing in connection. I see
Yeah.
healing in my communities in connection.
Yeah.
And I think that it
Yeah.
goes back to what you said at the very beginning around witnessing someone. When
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
witnessed, there's so much power in that. And if we're not willing to
Truly.
be vulnerable in showing whatever it is that needs to be healed to whatever community we're in, um,
Mm,
we miss out on that opportunity.
completely. I remember reading a philosopher. He was a Hasidic Jewish philosopher. His name was Martin Buber. He wrote a book called I and Thou, which is many, 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 many years old now. Um, the central premise of this book is that no matter where you are always in relationship. Whether you are alone, you are in relationship. You're in relationship with the people that you know, the people that you're related to, the people that you don't know yet, the people that you encounter on the street as you walk down the street. You are in relationship to the group of people that you're reading about in the newspaper. You are in relationship to yourself at all times. You are in relationship to the home that surrounds you, right? Like the concept is that you are always in relationship. You are never actually alone.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
Mm-hmm.
And it really impacted me because at the time I felt very, very, very alone. All of those wonderful story items that I told you about my history, my herstory, as I would say, of my life, what made my life what it was, the circumstances that created it, they had a ripple effect and had a variety of things happen, which meant that I had many things to be dealing with by the time I was in my early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get a lot of help to move myself through some very dark moments. But this concept that I was always in relationship really had me comprehend that I am part of a fabric. I am enmeshed with many people. Now, I may not want to be enmeshed with many people, and enmeshment has a really bad rap because people often think of it as um, a bad thing, that you have emotions connected to other people, or that you have lives intertwined with other people, or that you might rely on somebody for your response and back again. And I think that there are, like anything, I think it's a mechanism. And I think that you can tip one way or you can tip the other way.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean the mechanism's at fault. It means that your ability to be in that mechanism from one pole to the other of that spectrum is the thing that you need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And so enmeshment to me is actually about interdependence and being part of a fabric. Now, threads in a fabric are known for their own color, right? They're known for their own luminescence. They're known for their own thickness, but together they form something.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I really comprehended that my story is part and parcel of a larger story. That larger story is part and parcel of a much larger story.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the world in that way, I comprehend that anything I do for myself to make myself shine more, right? To be more proud of my thickness, to be, to continue with the thread theme. All that does is augment what's around me as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it permissions everyone around you to do the same.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that it's so easy to feel isolated, especially in the times of social media and so much happening online. And there are people like literally in the park waiting for your friendship.
Yep.
And just remembering that. And I love that you talked about permission to shine. And I think that that comes up for people. I know that's something I've had to work through myself.
Well, you're from Nebraska. Like, I would imagine that there's not a lot of shining allowed in Nebraska.
There's not a lot of shining allowed. Like, don't shine. Don't be a tall poppy in the field, or you'll get your head chopped off. Kind of a feeling.
That's what I would imagine.
Yeah, that's the way it felt. And so I still, if I get into one of those triggered moments, like you were talking about in the grocery store, and my triggers are different, but if I get into some of those triggers, I can still feel that sense of, it's almost a fear. Like, well, it's not almost a fear. It is a fear. And it feels in the moment life-threatening.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, so here's what I would say about that. When I think about, okay, so Nebraska, What do I know about Nebraska? I know that it is midway in the country from the West Coast, from the East Coast. And so when I think about how the United States was formed and the waves of people that came across from Europe, the old world, into the East Coast and then spread out, anyone getting as far as Nebraska would have already gone through whatever levels of food scarcity, would have already gone through whatever levels of feeling physically unsafe in whatever ways, because not only would they have encountered other peoples, which, you know, is always a difficult thing when you meet new peoples and you don't know them, so you don't know what's going to occur, but you would have also encountered landscape, literally landscape, that did not behoove not allow your passage through. So you would have had to double back. So you would have been questioning yourself. You would have been like, there's all sorts of things that happened in the story of the people that eventually ended up in Nebraska to then create the generations of people that grew up in Nebraska that would have had all those stories encoded in them, right? So where I talk about embodied emotional intelligence, my intelligence tells me that the embodiment of those stories has happened in you already, right? And that embodiment is what holds those triggers.
Yes.
It's the encoding of those stories in your physical flesh.
Exactly. And just to go one step further,
Sure.
For the listener who's like, I hear this term embodiment and I'm not clear what that means. It means that in my physical body, if we're talking about this example from me coming from Nebraska, in my physical body, there are remnants of the first settlers that came through, and I store them in my body. And so that fear that I have about sticking my neck out, about being too tall, too big in the field, is literally in my body, which is why my somatic work with breath work and theta healing and Reiki has been really kind of selfish, because as I got trained in those, I was able to experience that healing myself. So that was, I mean, that was not why I got trained in those, but it was a beautiful byproduct.
Well, ultimately, those skills are the thing that is allowing you to find liberation from the current embodiment that you have. So the current encoding that is in your physicality. And, you know, there are steps to that. You become aware of those behaviors. You become aware that you want to change those behaviors. You have to do some work to undo those. And you can do that work cognitively, you can do that work energetically, you can do that work somatically, and you probably need to do some combination of all three. Right? Because there are different layers that different things are going to be stored on. I often talk about the human being as the original quantum computer, because we are quite literally quantum fields, quantum beings. There is no need for us to build a quantum computer over there. Well, our cells do exactly that, right? It encodes in an amazing way. And but to return to what I was saying, you have to decide that you want to undo those behaviors, which means a mindset change in a moment, right? A mindset change. And then you have to find a pathway to building something else so that you can encode something else in your embodiment. Right. And that's where working with practitioners like you, working with practitioners like me, are exactly the way to go about doing it, because and finding the one that resonates with you, so that you are sitting in a vibratory field. And I'm talking more energetics now than I am talking cognitive work. And by cognitive, I mean in your brain, in your intellect, in the space in your head. What I'm talking about now is in your energetic body, so around your physicality. So our bodies are bioelectrical fields, right? The way our cells work is that they create electricity from the energy that we have. So the sugar that goes into our cells that has come in from the food that we've eaten reacts with bacteria in our cells, and that then becomes the energy that we use. That gives off an energetic field. So ergo, we have an energetic field around us in the same way that the planet Earth has a magnetic field around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we mimic the same thing that the human being mimics a magnetic field in the same way that the Earth does. It's why things like walking out in nature helps a human to feel more grounded, feel more safe, feel more calm. Because what happens is the frequency of the earth is so much more strong than our frequency that we will co-regulate. So we will start to vibrate at the same level that the earth does when we're in those spaces, because our vibration, our magnetic field will vibrate at the same level as Earth, right? That's why walking in nature is such a grounding, calming thing for our nervous systems. But that only really works if you can cognitively be in nature and not be scared.
Mm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You could
Mm-hmm.
have an effect happening on your body, but you could have a physical story going on. You can have a mental story going on that then impedes your body from relaxing.
What would life be like for you if these statements were true? You're no longer a sponge for other people's emotions, and you have crystal clear thoughts. You confidently differentiate your feelings and others. People pleasing, it's a thing of the past. You stand firm in your emotional space, unaffected by external moods. Gone are the days of overcommitting to social events or overextending at work. You now embrace balance and put your well being first. Self care isn't just a buzzword, it's a daily practice, and you effortlessly access a state of calm no matter life's chaos. Meetings, a breeze. Your own business plan, a walk in the park. Fear no longer holds you back. Parenting challenges, no sweat. Your calm presence helps your kids regulate their emotions too. Confrontations, you handle them gracefully. No more freezing or tiptoeing around. Boundaries? You set them wisely, not too rigid, not too loose. Your relationship flourish, and you are your authentic self. Resentment, a thing of the past. You communicate openly and honestly with your loved ones. This transformation is possible, and I am here to guide you. Join me in the live, free, Yes to Me 3-day journey where you'll experience breathwork healing, meditations, and energetic techniques. Discover how to stop absorbing other people's energy and emotions, tune into your intuition, and ask for and interpret signs from the universe. Plus, you'll learn to say yes to your own desires and needs. Our focus areas are number one, what's yours, what's theirs, reducing emotional baggage from others. Number two, the boundaried yes, welcoming the extraordinary by saying no to the ordinary. And number three, expanding your capacity for full capacity living so you can finally claim your yes filled life. Save the date for the Yes to Me journey, September 12th through 14th, 2023. We'll be live each day from 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. And yes, there is a replay. To register, simply go to the link in the bio. To register, simply go to the link in the show notes or brendawinkle.com/yes to me. That's brendawinkle.com/YESTOME. The time has come for you to say yes to you. I'm just wondering how did your intuitive gifts find you? Is it something that has been always there? Is it something that you've had to foster and grow? Is it something that you kind of pushed into a top drawer somewhere for a while like I
Mm-hmm.
did? Or how did that work for
Okay. So I was born this way, to quote a singer.
you?
I was born this way. I have never known anything other than being this way.
Mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm,
has made me a very uh so when I alluded to being very lonely beforehand,
mm-hmm.
part of that was simply because of this gift that I've been given.
Oh, that hits.
Yes. So I spent most of my childhood, and so I should give some context here. So um I am an empath. I am highly sensitive. I am intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
I also grew up in an environment that made sure that I had hypervigilance, um, and where many of the people around me were dealing with the dislocation trauma that they were going through. And so
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of dysfunction around me. And that meant that I had to grow up very, very, very fast. It also meant that all of these emotional pieces were not co-regulated.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up very dysregulated, and yet I've had a very strong sense on the inside of I will not succumb. I will not be beaten by this.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of my life has been about, how do I not disappear into light when I'm dancing? How
Mm-hmm.
do I not take on the emotions of everybody else in the room while we're sitting in a room as a group watching an Indian movie, and I'm the only person sitting there crying completely
Mm-hmm.
the whole way through for 3 hours because nobody else in the room wants to cry, but there's a very convenient small child who can't help but absorb all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had to learn how to create um, boundaries from the inside out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And some of that, and I'll give you an example. I went to a therapist somewhere in my 20s, and she recognized that I had no boundaries. And the way she demonstrated that to me was that she had me stand up against a wall, and then she went to the other side of the room and she started walking towards me, and she said, what I want you to do is tell me when you are uncomfortable with me in your space.
Oh.
So you tell me to stop when you don't want me any closer. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how we'll figure out how far your boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
I had so few boundaries that she was right up against my nose before I said stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I still remember this to this day. I remember watching her walk towards me and checking and, doing the body scan that she had taught me to do,
Mm-hmm.
because she was one of the first people to really help me start learning how to deal with all of the things that were going on inside me.
Right.
I'm scanning, I'm scanning, I'm scanning, I'm scanning. There's no fear response. There's
Mm-hmm.
no nothing. There's literally blank numbness until she came to here. And that's when I was like, you have to stop because you can't go any further in.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I realized how far I let people in, how much
Mm-hmm.
absorption I do of other people's things. And there's a thing that I read about in Celtic lore, the sin eaters. They're people who would, I think, were empaths,
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
many,
Mm-hmm.
all the way back in the day, who would absorb the sin of the people around them. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you go to Mesoamerican times as well, they had the filth eaters, and a
Yes.
similar thing where they
Mm-hmm.
would, again, people who would take in that kind of
Mm-hmm.
um, sin, or as I would say, degauze other people, literally take the static out of other people's bioelectrical fields.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a modern day layer of that in our world, right?
I
And
do
I know
too.
that I'm one of those people. I know that you are one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about it. We don't have training for those people. We don't have initiation for those people. We recognize that actually there are initiatory things that happen to people. And we are starting to talk about it now. So we're starting to find one another as a group, a strata of
Yes.
society, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but it's a difficult thing to put into the context of today's society, because today's society doesn't work the same way.
Right.
So for me, I had to learn what it was that was going on for me, what it was I needed to do about that, and then actually learn the skill of how to push those boundaries from the inside out. Now, my boundaries are such that I can have a boundary, but I can also create a container for somebody to sit within.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because I've learned how to do that in such a way that the person I'm sitting with knows that I'm there, but I'm not going to impinge on their space. I'm actually going to create a space for them to sit within that is psychologically safe for them to be in, that is absolutely okay for them to cry in, for them to shout in, for them to stamp their feet in, for them to be joyful in, for them to really understand something powerful from who they are, and to be able to celebrate that and to get really big in this space, because it's a vast space that I create now. Right. But I had to learn how to do that, and I had to learn how to separate out me from you from them, them from we.
Yes.
And language impacts who you are as a human, right? So for me, the language that I learned as a child, the notion of we in that language is very different to the notion of we in English. Right? So it's a different notion of we. There is the same notion of we as in you and I, but there is also the notion of we as in you and I and that person over there.
Yes. More inclusive.
Right? So it's right. And so we has a separation in it, a slight separation in what the two different words for we means. And I had so much trouble with that when I first was trying to translate from what my mum would be saying to me and what I understood in English on a day-to-day basis. So I really had to dig into, what does we mean? What does I mean? How do I differentiate between those two things? What does that actually mean for the person in front of me? How are we so similar and so connected, and yet we're quite literally different beings encased in different meat suits?
Yes.
For want of a better term. But we're still consciousness looking at one another.
Yeah. I just love that you had someone in your life early on that could teach you about the boundary. And I came to that learning much, much later. And my process was really different. My process was, I'm so empathic that when I was placed in counseling and therapy to heal from some trauma and abuse, I was so tuned in to the feeling state of the person sitting across from me that it wasn't even a cognitive decision. It was a full body decision on, this person isn't strong enough to hear my true story, so I'm not going to. And I could also be totally truthful and also tell them what they wanted to hear. And so therapy for me did not work for decades.
Right.
Because if I wasn't with a therapist that was strong enough to hold me, I would end up holding them.
Yep.
And so
I know that space.
Yeah, I bet you do. So my learning boundaries was first having way too rigid of boundries, almost a distorted masculine, where, nobody can get in, no one can come in because I'm going to keep myself safe. So I'm have this really firm boundary. And so I'm still in the process of sort of softening that boundary, in a way that creates the container. And I've got the container thing really figured out. And then every now and again, if I get triggered, my distorted masculine just really flares.
Of course. And let me say, like, you are talking about two poles on a spectrum, right? We have either absolutely open or we have so closed it's ridiculous. And part of what life is about, in my view, is to recognize that there is always one pole and its opposite, and that we are always on a journey between those poles.
Yes.
Right. And that the teeter-totter that we are on is simply a mechanism. It's just the mechanism through which we are learning something. But what we're actually learning at all times, in all spaces, is balance. Balance for ourselves, balance for where we are. Right? And it's okay to go to the extremes to learn that. You don't know what something is unless you understand its contrast.
Exactly.
Right? You can't comprehend something without its contrast. So sometimes you do have to be at one end. Sometimes you do have to be at the other. What you really have to do, though, is not get stuck in either.
That's it. It's the fluidity.
Right. It's to recognize that, this is no longer serving me. That extreme over there also did not serve me. Where would I like to be on the spectrum that would serve me?
Today.
What work do I need to do to be in that space?
I love that.
What support do I need to do that work? What mechanisms can I deploy to give myself full resourcing to get to where I'd like to be?
And that's the question. Oh
Right.
my gosh. Aaliyah, I could literally talk to you for hours. And
that's because I sound so good.
It is because you sound so good. And that accent, I'm telling you what.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So as we close, I just have some getting to know you kinds of questions that I love to ask. The first one is, what is in your morning mug?
So firstly, I have to tell you about my mug. I got given as a gift this mug that keeps my tea warm at the temperature that I want. So that's the first thing that happens. Everything goes into this mug. The next thing is I am obviously a Brit and I love my tea. So I have a cup of Yorkshire Gold loose leaf tea that is put into a strainer, that is then put into my mug, that is then brewed for a good 5 minutes or so, that then has the exact splash of milk that I want, that then gets put to one side and then gets heated to the exact right temperature, so that I every morning have a ritual that sets me up for my morning, that reminds me that I'm valuable enough to me that I will take that time to have the beverage that I want exactly the way that I want it. And that it is no skin off my nose to do that for myself every day.
I really love that.
And not only do I know how to do that, my wife knows how to do that for me too.
Oh.
Because over the years that we've been together, I have shown her moment by moment, cup of tea by cup of tea. This one had a little bit too much milk. Okay. This one didn't brew for long enough. Okay. This one needs to be a slightly higher temperature. Okay. So over the years, I have taught her how I want my cup of tea so that she gets to love me the way I want to be loved. I get to receive that the way I want to be loved.
There's so much wisdom and goodness in what you've just described. Being willing to be vulnerable and grateful, and also really teaching someone how you want to be loved.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I feel like misty over that answer right now. Like, this is the first time that's ever happened, but
Be with it.
wow. I'm just
Be
like
with it.
almost overcome.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Thank you.
Pause.
Yeah. Thank you for seeing that. That was good.
It's available to everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's available.
Thank you. I'm just letting that sink in.
I can see that.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful that you're allowing yourself to have this right now.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. That feels good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So my second question is there a song that just lights you up? Every time you hear it, you just think, oh my gosh, I can do anything.
Absolutely. There is a song called We the Generation. It is by a London group called Rudimental, and it features the singer Mahalia. And it's like this rousing call from a younger generation that says, like, one of the lines in it is, we the generation, we have had enough. And it's this dance tune that absolutely, it's like, it's super silky, super smooth, has this rousing thing inside it. It makes me want to jump up and like dance around like a crazy person.
Oh
It's so
my
fun.
gosh. I'm going to look it up as soon as we get off this Zoom.
I'm gonna put it in the chat for you, because
Okay,
I think
perfect.
you will
Perfect.
really
I probably
appreciate it.
need that song today. I love it.
If I could play it right now, I would. But I think we probably can't do that right now. But
yeah, I will look
okay,
for it. I will
I will
look
put
it
it
up.
in your chat right now.
Thank you. So my third question is, and I'll just be really transparent. I'm rebranding the podcast. By the time that this goes live, the podcast is going to be Your Yes Filled Life.
Yes, I'm so proud of you. That's so cool.
Thank you.
Congratulations on making that switch.
Thank you. It feels really good. It just feels like
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
landed. So I'm gonna form a question around that.
Yeah.
And I realized at the beginning of the interview, I was like, oh yeah, this is coming out with the new podcast. So my question is, what do you think is the most important thing you've done to find your yes-filled life?
Oh, jeez. Okay, the most important thing I can tell you immediately was that 10 years ago, I embarked on a sexual empowerment coaching course, and I trained as a sexual empowerment coach, and I let myself do a practice that yeah, I'm going to say it. I'm just going to go there. I did a clitoral stroking practice, a partnered clitoral stroking practice. And I did it for a really long time. And it really taught me many different pieces around boundaries, for example, and around desire and requesting what I wanted, and being okay with a yes and being okay with a no, and getting very clear about where I wanted to go. And in that, it allowed me to deeply focus on the tiniest tendril of sensation that was occurring in my physicality, and then to be able to use that indication of sensation all the way through to my cognitive mind to say, oh, okay, this is actually what's going on for me right now. And so my embodied emotional intelligence isn't just about emotional intelligence in your brain or in your heart. It's all the way down to my genitals, because it is a full body experience for me.
I love that. And when we talk about full body yeses, a lot of times people mean everything but your sex organs, because we're not going to talk about those. But when we're talking about a full body experience, if we divorce ourselves from our sexuality, we're missing out on the creative force within every single one of us.
Absolutely.
So I love that that was your answer. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
I wasn't expecting it, but I am here for it.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, the reality is you have to be real about it, right? I can't hide that about who I am. It is a fundamental piece of what makes me who I am today. And so Yeah. And the reason why I went down that pathway was because I had tried every other way of being connected to myself, but I had followed the conventional wisdom that your sexuality is not a part of that. Except it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And so I had to turn that in that direction and eschew what people normally say and actually
Mhm.
follow a path that at the time seemed fairly dark and fairly scary and definitely against what other people think. And for me, it was definitely where all the sludge was.
I think for many of us, that's where all the sludge is because
Mm-hmm.
well, I mean, we could have a whole nother podcast
Mm-hmm.
about this, but
Mm-hmm.
I love that you shared that. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
being here on the podcast today.
You're so welcome.
Isn't Aaliyah amazing? Here are the takeaways. Number one, leadership comes from within and starts with self leadership. It means developing an emotional intelligence and not only embracing your cultural heritage, but celebrating the heritage of those you lead. Number two, connection with others starts inward and then moves outward. You are responsible for yourself as an individual and also responsible for understanding what your responsibility is to the collective, whether that's your community, your town, the library you joined, your online community. And it's worth asking, how am I contributing? Being a part of community and being witnessed is incredibly healing. Number three, exploring the inner landscape often means navigating discomfort and being willing to be vulnerable. But the rewards are really high. We heal in community and in relationships when we're vulnerable. Number four, embodied emotional intelligence is the encoding of our bodies that holds the stories we've lived. Our bodies store not only our stories, but the stories of the people around us and people in our past. And number five, boundaries are a very important part of leadership. Boundaries can be absolutely open to porous or absolutely closed to rigid, and we might find ourselves at either end at times. What we're learning is balance. To connect with Aaliyah, you can find her on Instagram at Touching the Emotion and at her website, touchingtheemotion.com. Be sure that you come join us for the Yes to Me 3-day journey by clicking the link in the bio. And be sure you grab your free 4-part video series, Breathwork to Strengthen and Trust Your Intuition, by going to the link in the show notes or to brendawinkle.com/breathe, BREATHE. Thank you so much for listening to your Yes Filled Life. I have a request. Could you please leave the podcast a rating or review? The more positive ratings and reviews a podcast has, the more likely it is to show up in the feed of someone who really needs it. And my commitment is truly to bring you joy, to spread possibility. And you can help spread that simply by giving the podcast a rating or a review. And if you loved this episode, would you please share it with a friend? Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.